Italy gave us Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Maserati. But for every masterpiece that rolled out of Italy, there was also this. Today we're looking at 10 Italian car designs gone wrong, making you wonder if the designers were having a very bad day or if someone spiked the espresso. The Fiat Multipla, double disaster. We cannot talk about the worst Italian car designs without talking about the Fiat Multipla. But here's what's truly shocking. Fiat actually made this mistake twice. Lesser known is the original Fiat 600 Multipla from 1956, which looked like someone took a regular Fiat 600 and stretched it through some kind of automotive torture device. The original Multipla was Fiat's attempt at creating a people carrier before anyone knew what a people carrier should look like. Picture a Fiat 600 that's been inflated like a balloon animal at a particularly sad birthday party. The proportions were absolutely bizarre. Tall, narrow, with the aerodynamics of a refrigerator falling off a cliff. The front end looked perpetually surprised, as if it couldn't believe what it had become. Families actually packed into this weird little van like sardines, convinced that looking ridiculous was worth the extra space. It stayed in production for 11 years, proving that function sometimes beats form, even when the form is this questionable. Fast forward to 1998, and Fiat decided to resurrect the Multipla name. Apparently, they looked at the original and thought, you know what this needs? To be even uglier. This bloated monstrosity featured 6 seats in 2 rows, and a front end that looked like it had been designed by a committee of people who had never seen a car before. The real crime was the bizarre stepped front end. Imagine someone stacking building blocks and then deciding that was the perfect shape for a car. There was one step for the bumper, another for the hood, then a weird metal bar housing a pair of upper headlights, topped off by an almost vertical windshield. But wait, it gets worse. They gave it not 2, not 4, but 6 headlights arranged in 3 pairs at the different levels like some kind of automotive spider. ISO Rivolta Lele. If the Multipla was a crime against automotive beauty, then the ISO Rivolta Lele was a war crime against Italian design heritage. Picture this, your ISO, a small Italian manufacturer known for building gorgeous supercars like the Grifo. You've got Bertone doing your design work and a reputation for creating automotive art. So naturally, you decide to build something that looks like it was designed by someone who had only heard Italian cars described over a bad phone connection. The Lele was supposed to be ISO's grand touring sedan, their answer to the Maserati Quattroporte. Instead, it looked like someone had taken a perfectly decent car and systematically removed everything that made it attractive. The proportions were completely wrong. Too long, too low, with a nose that stretched on forever and a rear end that looked like it had been designed during a particularly uninspired lunch break. Only 285 were ever built, which tells you everything you need to know about how the public felt about this automotive disaster. Fiat 128 3P Berlinetta. Meet the Fiat Berlinetta, proof that slapping sports car styling cues onto an economy car doesn't magically make it attractive. Fiat took their sensible, practical 128 sedan and decided it needed a sporty 3-door variant. The result looked like someone had put the original 128 through a photocopier that was running low on toner. The Berlinetta name suggested something sleek and Italian, but what you actually got was a car that looked like it had been designed with a ruler and absolutely no imagination. The rear pillar was so thick it could have doubled as a structural support beam, and the proportions were so awkward that it seemed perpetually embarrassed about its own existence. Fiat stuck with this styling experiment for almost a decade, despite its awkward looks. Zagato Zele. Now here's where things get truly bizarre. Zagato, the legendary Italian design house responsible for some of the most beautiful Aston Martins and Alfa Romeos ever made, decided to create an electric city car. The result was the Zele, which looked like a washing machine that had been given wheels and delusions of grandeur. This wasn't just ugly, it was aggressively, offensively ugly. The Zeal had all the sex appeal of a kitchen appliance and about as much style as a concrete block, with its bizarre proportions and complete lack of any recognizable automotive design language. It looked like Zagato had collectively decided to see just how ugly they could make a car before people stopped calling it a car altogether. To save money, they ditched proper roll-down windows for sliding units that belonged on a budget caravan and mounted the door hinges on the outside like they were building a garden shed. Thankfully, the automotive world was spared further embarrassment when production mercifully ended after just 2 years. Maserati Chialami. If you thought Zagato had lost its way, wait until you meet the Maserati Chialami, proof that even the most prestigious Italian brands could completely abandon everything that made them special. This wasn't just an ugly car, it was an identity crisis on wheels. The Chialami was essentially a De Tomaso Longchamp with a Maserati badge slapped on it, because apparently Maserati thought their customers wouldn't notice they were buying a rebadged car from a completely different manufacturer. The front end featured a generic chrome grille that looked like it had been ordered from a catalog labeled Generic Luxury Car Parts, while the rest of the body had all the elegant proportions of a brick that someone had optimistically called a Grand Tourer. The side profile was particularly offensive, a long, flat hood that seemed to go on forever, interrupted by a greenhouse that looked like it had been designed by someone who had never seen a Maserati before. Fiat Duna. Meet the Fiat Duna. This wasn't just another ugly Fiat. This was Fiat actively trying to see how boring and unappealing they could make a family car. The Duna's proportions were completely wrong. Too tall, too narrow, and with a rear end that looked like someone had just given up halfway through the design process and called it a day. The front end featured headlights that seemed surprised to be part of such a mediocre car, while the side profile had all the visual excitement of a filing cabinet on wheels. Even the name Duna suggested sand dunes, which was fitting because this car had about as much personality as a pile of sand. Fiat marketed this disaster primarily in South America, probably because they were too embarrassed to sell it in Europe where people might actually see it. The fact that it stayed in production for 15 years proves that sometimes lowered expectations are the key to automotive longevity. Autobianchi Y10. The Autobianchi Y10 was what happened when Fiat's designers were asked to create a small city car and apparently decided that small meant completely devoid of any redeeming visual qualities. This tiny disaster looked like someone had taken a normal car and run it through a shrinking machine that only worked on the attractive parts. The Y10's most offensive feature was its bizarre rear end, which featured taillights that looked like they'd been borrowed from a cheap toy car and a rear window so small it seemed like the designers were actively trying to eliminate rear visibility. The side profile was equally tragic, a stubby, tall box that managed to look both cramped and ungainly at the same time. The front end featured a grille that looked like it was frowning in disappointment at its own existence. Lamborghini LM002. Before our finale, we reached the Lamborghini LM002, also known as the Rambo Lambo, a nickname that tells you everything you need to know about how seriously people took this automotive identity crisis. This was what happened when Lamborghini looked at their beautiful low-slung supercars and thought, you know what this needs? To be the exact opposite of everything we're known for. The LM002 looked like someone had taken a military truck, covered it in anabolic steroids, and then tried to convince people it was a luxury vehicle. The proportions were absolutely bonkers. Imagine a Countach that had been inflated with a bicycle pump until it was tall enough to drive over other cars. The front end featured Lamborghini's signature angular styling, but stretched over such a massive frame that it looked like a caricature of itself. The side profile was particularly ridiculous. Tiny windows perched on top of a body so tall and wide, it looked like it was constantly flexing. With its 5.2-liter V12 engine from the Countach crammed into this rolling monument to excess, the LM002 was proof that sometimes having unlimited engineering resources doesn't mean you should use them. Only 328 were built, making it simultaneously one of the rarest and most questionable decisions in Lamborghini's history. Alfa Romeo SZ RZ. And finally, we have the Alfa Romeo SZ, also known as Il Mostro, the Monster. When your own manufacturer gives your car a nickname that translates to monster, you know you've created something truly special. And by special, we mean especially ugly. The SZ looked like someone had taken a beautiful Alfa Romeo, fed it nothing but protein powder for 6 months, and then hit it repeatedly with an ugly stick until it gave up trying to be attractive. The front end featured a sharp, angular nose that looked more robotic than romantic, while the rear end was so abruptly chopped off, it seemed like the designers had simply run out of ideas and called it a day. The side profile was a masterclass in awkward proportions, bulging fender flares that looked like automotive tumors, and a roofline that appeared to have been designed by someone who had never seen a sports car before. Despite having legitimate racing credentials and impressive performance, the SZ proved that sometimes even the most Italian of collaborations, Alfa Romeo engineering with Zagato design, can produce something that looks like it was assembled from the spare parts of several different nightmares. Only 1,036 were built, which was probably 1,036 too many for the world's collective aesthetic well-being. From Fiat's double dose of multipla madness to Alfa Romeo's own self-proclaimed monster, these cars remind us that sometimes the line between genius and disaster is thinner than you think. The real question is, which of these Italian nightmares would you actually be brave enough to drive?